Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name's Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. You probably know that. It is Friday, the 22nd of September at 11 a.m. Central Texas time. And if you know anything about me, you know that 22 is a big, big number for me. And this is the 22nd episode. And what's crazy about this is it was not planned because we had some weeks we didn't do this. And here we are, episode number 22 on September 22. And of course, this is what 5784 in the Jewish calendar. And I just like it. I just like it. I like it that in September, it's interesting how the Jewish calendar is related to the lunar cycle and the Julian calendar is based on the sun, right? And it's interesting about Rosh Hashanah, right? This kind of period of 2 days. And it's really interesting that they give like a window of time before the new year because you got to see the crescent moon, the beginning of the crescent moon. And sometimes it's cloudy, man. What's so amazing, though, to me about numbers and just everything that God has created is that he uses different things to speak to us. And it's a wink. We're going to be talking a lot about that because I got a lot to say today about how thankful I am for so many things. And I think that heart of thankfulness, it comes from knowing that I'm not alone, in this whole, business and story of life. I'm not alone. You know why? Because Steve's here. What's up, Steve? What's up, buddy?
Hey, man. How you guys doing?
Oh, man. I'm so glad to see you. It is so great. I got a lot going on right now, Steve. We're moving offices. It's Friday. We got all kinds of kids and sports and all that stuff. And, you reach out to me. You're like, hey, are we on today? And I'm like, yes, we're on today. We're on today. It is such a joy to have these conversations because what's really neat is it's almost like it's like a hand grenade, right? We're like we pull the pin and we just kind of hand it out. And I get to see these, people like watching stuff from long ago and they're like, hey, I saw this thing. And it's cool to see and it's cool to document this stuff. But I really like this format, Steve, of just you being willing. So one, thank you so much for being willing to just fly by the seat of your pants and have these discussions. It's super refreshing to me because it's not like we have, this, schedule or plan, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I enjoy it too. It's my favorite way to converse. And so, hey, glad the good Lord thought about having us share our conversations with folks. It's been fun.
Yeah, it has been fun. And so let's say hello to people that are here today. We got a number of people that are kind of coming in and out. They always want to say hello and make sure that they know that they're either going to watch it live or catch it on the replay. But Sam was number one. He was front row and center today. Sam, thanks for being here. He's been sending me stuff, encouraging me. And just Sam, thanks so much. It means a lot when people reach out. And I'm sure you run into this a lot too. Is it just someone out of the blue just goes, hey, Steve, thanks so much for this.
Yeah,
it really is. It's really nice, and it's so cool to know that it's like you're yelling in a canyon. And you're like, well, maybe I'll hear an echo once, and it's nice to hear that. So thank you so much for the encouragement, Sam. Really appreciate that. David Lee, all the way from Southwestern Indiana, the guy who's hugging everybody, and I know he's busy. He said, episode 22. Thank you, gentlemen. Stacy and his daughter are competing today. Or no, is that the dog? It might be the dog. are competing today on the agility course. Yeah, tearing it up. Okay, so she is the dog trainer, if you will, the handler, I think is what they call it.
Mhm.
We'll be listening between runs. Have a great weekend, all. David Lee, thanks so much for everything, just who you are. Isn't that cool, Steve? I'm so
Yeah.
thankful for who you are, like who God made you to be. That's the same thing with David Lee. And
Yeah.
that's the question. I don't know that everybody kind of sees things like that. Like, looks at people and says, "You know what? I'm not going to judge you based on what you do. I'm going to judge you. I'm going to be thankful for who you are, who you were made to be." Is that important to articulate? It seems like to me it is, because it just doesn't happen much.
Well, yeah, because we by default are trained the other way. I mean, we're trained, whether overtly or covertly, to exclude folks rather than include folks. And it's pretty easy to exclude them because I mean, you don't have to look at me very long to see that I got a wheelbarrow full of stuff that you don't may not appreciate. So it's easy to exclude, but it takes some effort to pause and say, okay, what's going on with this dude, this gal? What is it? How are they really ticking inside? Who are they and what are they really all about? And man, now we're back to the whole interest concept again.
Amen.
And it's everywhere.
You know what's so cool about that? This just popped into my head because Ray and I were having this conversation. They had some folks in, ministry that they work with, invite them to dinner. And I think the wife, of the couple that they met with, stopped for a second, and was interested in Ray's wife and said, "Hey, how's your heart with your daughter going away to school?" And it's such, like, how meaningful that stuff is,
Yeah.
that somebody would actually take interest. I feel like so much of our lives, we're so busy, and I think maybe maturity, you see this, you got grandkids, and that's kind of like the granddad thing to do, is to show interest. But it seems like to me that's that essence of community. And it's funny to find that in like crypto, like all of this, but that there's somebody that actually can get beyond themselves.
Yeah.
There's nothing more annoying than somebody talking about themselves. Hey, let me tell you more about me. And somebody actually going, hey, how you doing? Like,
Yeah.
are you okay? I mean, you've probably seen that. There's a lot of power in your interest in others, not just Jesus, right?
Oh my goodness. If I can tell you a little story.
Please.
Um, um, oh, this is many years ago. The Lord had taken us for the first time from the Oklahoma City area down to the Arlington, Texas area, and so there's a whole long story about how we got there. So we end up um, in this townhouse in Arlington, and the Lord had told us to go down in the Dallas Fort Worth area. Had no idea that Arlington was in the middle, but there it was between
Yep.
Dallas and Fort Worth. And we were having some financial difficulty. I mean, it was serious stuff. And I was sitting at my desk and just saying, Lord, what do we do here, man? This is getting pretty daggone hairy here. We just, you know, we sold everything we had. We came down here. I don't have a clue what you're wanting to do, but we're here and bills need to be paid. And I know only a few folks on the stream would understand that, but it was pretty intense. And my 4-year-old son all of a sudden walks into the room that I had made my office, and I've shared this with you about him. From the time he was able to hold a pencil, he's been drawing. So he comes up to me and he hands me these little pieces of paper in little rectangles. And I look at them and they have faces and numbers on them. And he says, "Here, Daddy, here is some money."
Oh, wow.
And I just, oh, son, what? And I was just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I said, "Thank you for that, son." And he said, "Yeah, now you can buy me some toys." right? And so I go from this overwhelming to this, you know, to this just belly laugh, just like again, I said, thank you for that, son. We'll
That's what I
make
need.
sure we get you some toys. And so anyway, so he leaves, and I just break down
Yeah.
and I say, Lord, what is going on here? My son comes in, he understands what is happening here.
Yep.
And his answer was, I'm giving you now what you would beg me for in the future, but I could not. I said, what? He said, I'm giving you now what you would beg me for in the future, but I could not. He has such a fascinating way of speaking.
Hmm.
And I said, Lord, what is that? He said, time with your family and children.
Yep.
Enjoy it. And Matt, that you talk about a radical course correction
Yep.
in the way that I was thinking, because what I was thinking about was what I didn't have. And what he was describing to me is what I did have that so far surpassed in value the thing that I thought I lacked.
Yeah.
And it totally changed me. Now, guess what? I started paying attention to my family.
Yep.
I started paying attention to my children. I started paying attention to the good things that he had given me. And the effect of that, then the spillover effect of that, was I started carrying that over into other people. And I began to understand just how powerful interest is in whatever it is that that interest is coming into contact with,
Yeah.
whether it's an idea, a person, a concept, a need, an opportunity. It just doesn't matter. If there's no interest, it's not happening. If there's interest, you're about to go for the ride of your life.
Yeah.
So that's a little story there that you know is kind of the genesis for me of how all this comes together.
What year do you think that was? Around what time you think?
That was probably I'd say somewhere in the 1983
Yeah.
83 time frame,
Well,
83,
I'm
84.
not surprised, right? That was
Yeah.
that time, and that's what a wonderful story. And will you say again what he said to you that I'm going to give to you?
I'm giving to you now what you would beg me for in the future,
Yeah.
but I could not.
Okay. What an amazing. You're right. Like how he speaks and how you're like, and think about that. What a wonderful perspective. And I find that what Jesus is always doing is reorienting us.
Yes. Yes.
And I feel like a lot of this is, we talk a lot about, you know, who you're listening to and who has authority to speak to you.
Yeah.
And then you tell these stories about like, well, this is what he said at this time. My son gives me this, his made up his made up money. And the irony of where we are today.
I was just going to say, and
Yeah.
here we be.
Yeah. And of course I look across the camera at you and I go, it doesn't look like you missed a meal. So you're in good shape. You
Yeah.
seem healthy, and it's like that was 1983 when you're struggling. And I think there's a lot of people who are in the depths of despair.
Yeah.
And I remember I went through very similar thing where I was blowing and going up into the right, baby, 10 years, just like killing it.
Yeah.
And of course, I wasn't making terribly great choices, but my kids were little and I was, building a career. I was CEO of a company. We had 200 people. I'm like, man, look at me.
Yeah.
And he took it all away. And I really went through a very difficult time after that. I mean, being fired from a business you created,
Yeah.
I look at BitBoy or Steve Jobs, right? It's just like, yeah, how is this possible? You create something and they're like, we don't need you anymore.
Yeah.
And you go through this, crisis. And what was amazing about it is ever since my kids were little, right? So we moved here to Central Texas in 2011. And that's when, so I basically had a business from 2001 to 2011, 10 full years of up and to the right. And it all came crashing down.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is my daughter, one was in kindergarten, starting kindergarten, and one was in pre-K 3. They were little. I have been home pretty much every single day since 2011, moving to Central Texas.
Isn't that
Every
amazing?
every home, every dinner, and all that stuff. And what was amazing is I was really, really struggling, right, with finances and dealing with all that. And a buddy, I've told this story before, but buddy goes, "Hey, I want you to meet somebody." And he told me about this guy. He wants to talk to you. I didn't know who he was because he knew I was struggling. And that was that story where I literally was out on the back patio and he's like, "Hey man, how you doing?" I didn't know this guy from anybody. Could have been you, you know? And he's like, "Hey, how you doing? I hear you're not doing so good." I said, "Yeah, I'm really struggling." And then he went through this whole list. He goes, "Hey, how are your kids doing? How's your marriage doing? How's all this stuff doing?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's good. It's good." He goes, "You don't have any problems."
That's right.
And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Dude, the best possible problem you could have is financial."
Absolutely.
That's what he said to me. And I was like, it was hard to hear, but he was right.
Absolutely right.
And you think about, there's a guy, what's his name? Jocko. He's this, Navy SEAL guy, motivational guy. And he goes, every time somebody comes to me with a problem, he goes, your answer is always the same. He's like, you know what he says? Good.
Yeah.
Whatever problem you got, good. And you think about this is that how C.S. Lewis talked about the problem of pain, right? And he
Yeah.
talks about his wife and this difficulty of dealing with um, with pain in our lives. And a lot of times we don't see it as protective, but we also, you know, it's amazing. My buddy Greg, who introduced me to that guy, he went through 75 rounds of chemo and died
Yeah.
of stage 4 colon cancer. And he said the greatest thing that ever happened to me was getting cancer. And I'm like,
Yeah.
really? Like genuinely? Yeah, he wrote
Yeah.
a book about it. He's like, it's the greatest thing. And you know what he said it did for him? It took him down to this base layer where he couldn't, it was like he couldn't even talk. And
Mhm.
he said, because of that, I listened. And I want to talk about this concept and what a great segue into this idea of the base layer. Okay. I think a lot of times in the secular world and in business books and in, self-help books and all these kind of things, you see it across the board is that you see people saying, "Hey, you need to meditate more, or you need to do this, that, or the other." And I remember reading the book, what was it? Think and Grow Rich. It was written
Oh,
in the
yeah.
1930s by Napoleon Hill. And it was like one of the first self-help books. But he talks about this concept of infinite intelligence. And of course, you see this in the secular world a lot is that people don't want to talk about Jesus. They don't
Yeah.
want to talk about God, but they want to say, hey, even I recognize that behind all of this, there is at a base layer, whether that's up or down, there is what Napoleon Hill called a infinite intelligence. And when I think about this, we want a slot machine intelligence, right? We want to put
Yeah.
a coin in and get a bunch of coins out. What's amazing about who God is and the speaking nature of Jesus is that he's always there.
Yeah.
And it's really amazing. People get put into prison or I look at my own story. It's like I was at the end of myself. And it was like, I have to take you to a place where you can actually shut up and listen. That's how I felt. Like it's like I'm gonna create these scenarios in which you have exhausted all of your own personal capabilities to muscle this thing. And finally, you're gonna stop and you're gonna go, I got nothing.
Yeah.
And that's like this perfect place to be because it's like, it's either so loud that you don't hear it, or it's just so quiet that you can't help but hear it. Can you talk about that as it relates to really the theme of what we talk about is this idea of Jesus is alive and he speaks, but it seems like there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of the self noise that gets in the way. Can you help like orient us on that? Is that a good analogy of a kind of a base layer is getting to the source?
Well, yeah, and we do it all the time in virtually everything else we do. I mean, okay, so somebody hands us a book with 30 chapters in it. We go to chapter 15 and we read from 15 to 25, and all of a sudden we're going to tell everybody what the book's about.
Yep.
Really? Well, how many people would recommend that approach if you're really interested in what the book's about?
Yeah.
What the author had in mind when he or she was writing this book. No, you'd say, hey, listen, you got to go back to the beginning. You got to go back to the baseline. You got to go back to the source. You have to go back to the beginning if you want to understand what the end is all about. And and that's essentially what it, where we find ourselves. We have been taught to go to the middle of the book and then conclude what it's all about without talking with the author.
Wow.
And it's like, no, the author's telling us from the very first words in what we hold as the complete revelation of God, which we call the Bible, which, if you want to talk about that a little bit, that's kind of an interesting concept in itself, in this whole base layer idea. And he's speaking the entire time.
Yeah.
You've described it many times on this stream and in other places when you've referred to it, is that here the entirety of this document that so many hold as sacred, infallible, and inerrant is nothing more than one documentation after another of the Creator speaking to his man,
Yeah.
both male and female.
All of it.
The entirety of it. So wait a minute. So if that's what he's doing, then why all of a sudden have we turned to the book and decided that the book is
Yeah.
the thing of highest authority? How does that work?
Yeah.
It just doesn't. It's like you mentioned being a CEO of your company. Well, it's like you writing a vision, mission, and purpose statement, accompanied then with the infrastructure of how the organization is going to be built, and then have HR come in and put in policies and procedures to deal with the individuals about how they're supposed to conduct themselves. And then all of a sudden saying that those documents supersede anything that you as its creator might say or think or
Yeah.
want to do about any
Yep.
particular action. It does not make any sense, and yet somehow we have bought into that model. So no, if you want to know what the creation is about, if you want to know what you're about, if you want to know what God is about, it begins with going to the base layer of asking him.
Yeah.
And that's what we talk about all the time, on this stream. Just go ask him. It
Yeah.
will astound you the way that he answers.
Well, it's amazing what is represented, at least in Christendom across the world, of those who we consider to be men and women of God, is what they've told us. And a lot of times, what people tell you is, by not telling you, I'm telling you, I don't really believe that he's alive and he speaks. In case in point, if we look back to what is this, what's the oldest piece of literature that we have that we recognize as an account? And it makes me think about, let's say, grandma passes away and you go up into her attic and you open up this old dusty trunk, and in that is her diary from when she was in her teens.
Yeah.
And all the family gathers around, and you just lost grandma, and we've never seen this before, and it's got, it's wrapped up together, and you open it up and you start reading. And this is, let's say, between when she was 20 and 30, she would write every day about her accounts with Jesus. Obviously, it's a made up story, but people do journal. And you think about this idea and you go, wow, here we're learning and seeing these things that Jesus did in her life. And I think about my father in law's mother. She's this type of woman. She was
Yeah.
this type of woman where she was rescued out of the fire. And it was like every single day. And let's say we read that entire thing. It's like this huge journal. Is it true? Yeah, it's true. She walked with Jesus for, these 20 years or 10 years, and she wrote an account of it. I'm not gonna make it, the Holy Scriptures, but I'm gonna praise God, and I'm gonna learn something from it. And it's just like your story you told the other day about how the Lord told you, "Hey, you're gonna go buy a house and you got 20 bucks."
Yeah.
And just the story you just told about your son putting in the money. These things are a part of this, and I think because so much has been built on the back of, like, Western civilization, if you really boil it down, the core document is the Bible. I mean,
Yes.
Jordan Peterson goes into a really cool, detailed structure to say, literally, it's the source document for civilization in the West.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I don't care how much is built on top of it. It's an account of what he said. And I think that one of the greatest services I think we were providing in these streams is to remind people that the author is still alive and the author can be spoken to and the author is still speaking. And I talk to people all the time where they're like, I was in this really, really difficult situation. I was almost to die. And like Jesus spoke.
Yeah.
Right. And what we're basically saying is let's be proactive about that. Let's not wait until we're on the edge of a cliff for him to intercede.
Yeah.
Let's actually seek him out. And of course, you think about so many scriptures, right? It's like without faith, it's impossible to please God because you first have to like accept that he exists and then rewards those who earnestly seek him. And it was really crazy when I was prepping for today. I always look at what the verse of the day today is. And listen to this. This is Matthew 5:6. This is, blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Well, what is a hunger and a thirst if not interest?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're hungry and thirsty, you're like, I've seen nothing else except getting water and food. Well,
Yeah.
what is that like? Well, righteousness of, I want to know you and hear from you. And to think that, I jokingly say we get cut in on the deal and that we get the cheat codes, right? But
Mhm.
that's how this was structured, that he would partner with his man, that it is his joy, just like you as a father and me as a father with sons. It's like, I love you.
Yeah.
I want to guide you. All you have to do is come to the author. And I think what's so cool about it is it doesn't negate the fact that the Bible may be true, right? Like these accounts are accounts of how great God is.
Yeah.
And it's I've often said to you, it's not like a wholesale 180. It's a focusing of this lens to say, let's make sure that we are coming up underneath the authority of the living author versus a derivative of the author.
Yeah.
And I think of no one in the Christian world who can disagree with that. Because if you put the Bible above the author, you're wrong. And I'm not negating that it's not an incredible account. I'm just saying it basically, without you saying it, you're saying the author is not alive and he does not speak anymore. And
Well,
that is not true
what's fascinating, Matt, is we don't do that anywhere else on the planet,
in any
but with the
situation.
guy in any situation except the guy who did it all, made it all,
Yeah.
is it all. I mean, can you imagine going, taking algebra in class and a guy writing a book about algebra, and then you say, screw the guy who wrote it, I'm going to the book because the book is superior to the guy who wrote it? I mean, we wouldn't do that. We'd get something in the book that we don't understand. Where do we go? To somebody who is superior to the book.
That's a really
And if
good
we have
point.
and if we have access to the person who wrote the book, we go there. Otherwise, we go to the teacher. Why? Because the teacher is supposed to be superior to the book.
Yeah.
And so we don't do that in any other place. One of the tragedies that is actually a strategic stroke of genius is to separate God from his man
Yeah.
and to view that as not only a reality, but a justifiable reality. And so if you get into the various religions, now we talk mostly about, Christianity because that's, what we're involved in, and have been raised in our own lives, most of the people on this stream. Um, but what does that what does that religious approach do? See, I hold the basic idea that I've never met anybody who is opposed to God. What they're opposed to are those who present God in a way that is not only unintelligent, but incredibly offensive.
Yep.
So for an example, we have a God of love who then destroys everybody.
His man.
Well, so which is it?
Yeah.
Is he a God of love or does he destroy everybody?
Yep.
So there is even atheists. See, I hold that there's no such thing as an atheist. See, it's just that you're rejecting the concept of God that you've been taught. You've been taught, and so you say, "Hey, I'm rejecting that idea," and then transferring that to the being that the idea is speaking of. Well, the reality is you weren't there from the beginning. So if you've got the horsepower to declare that there's not a God, then what does that make you? So there's all kinds. You spoke of noise a few minutes ago. The noise is there to distract and to muffle and to misdirect. And so learning to move into the quietness of just the simple question rooted in an interest that says, hey, what's the real story here?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's
Okay.
funny how that principle is true about everything. I mean, look at, the things that people jokingly say in common popular culture today that there's no such thing as a conspiracy theory. Just give it 6 months and it'll be true.
Yeah.
Now, I know that there are some conspiracy theories, but it's really interesting. What are we in? We're in an era now where we're seeing these things get exposed, and we've talked about this, it's rotting from within. What are we seeing? We're seeing it in the light, and we're coming to see it for what it is. And you talk about noise. Let's go a little deeper into this and recognize there's so much noise.
Yeah.
Meaning it is, and if you think about it, and it's almost like from a teaching perspective, you're saying, I want you to see this as binary to understand it. Now,
Yeah.
it's highly it's a gradient, but let's just use this black and white kind of concept just for you to understand it. Anything that is not of him, right? Anything that is not spoken directly from him, um, in let's say in a binary sense, is noise and is meant to separate you or distract you from that. And we've gone into so many examples of that. This idea of it wants you, the darkness wants you to be misdirected, wants you to be taken out of the game, wants you to be distracted, wants you to be really upset, wants you to be, it takes you out of being effective. And it's interesting to me, what I think so powerful about our discussions are there's not we're not selling a product. We're not asking somebody to join the Church of Steve. There's not a motivation behind what we're talking about other than you going directly to the source. But so many things that are telling you the stories today religiously have an agenda,
Yeah.
either to maintain or promote their thing, right? We need more people, more butts in the seat, Steve. Well,
Yeah.
if you're serving that, you're not, and that's the thing that's really interesting is this natural community that's been built around crypto. It's one that doesn't have, hierarchies and rules. And it's like, well, why is it so refreshing? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's a couple episodes ago. One of the viewers, NT Fryer, I think was his handle. If
Yes,
I'm
yeah, yeah, it
yeah.
was. It was NT Fryer, yeah. Yeah,
Am
yeah.
I saying is handle the right word?
You're right. Yeah, correct. Yep.
Okay. He says I've enjoyed listening to this stream, but I am frustrated.
Yeah.
Well, and then he talked about it from he knows Jesus is alive because he experiences that whenever he partakes of the Eucharist.
Yep.
So he's speaking from a Catholicism standpoint.
Hmm.
His environment is in the religious construct of Catholicism. Okay, cool. It, that's okay. No worries there. The question is, why are you frustrated?
Yeah.
If you enjoy listening to this, why are you frustrated? What is creating the frustration? Well, see, that frustration is a friction that comes against us. In this case, NT. But we've all experienced that where we've heard something that sounds pretty cool or pretty interesting, but it's colliding with a lot of other things that we either believe or hold as valuable or something of that nature. And this collision occurs. Well, the collision is there. You can't deny the collision. You're experiencing it in real time. The question is, how are you going to view that collision?
Yeah.
Are you going to view that collision as something that's going to drive you away? Is it you going to view that collision as something that's going to put you at odds with somebody or something? In that particular instance, the thing that you've been interested in listening to and found interesting. What are you going to do with that collision? Well, life is full of those collisions. And in every one of those collisions, there is something to learn about the base code. See,
Yeah.
if you view it that way, let me give you an example of this again in this noise thing. I can't tell you, and I'm going back to my playing days, how many times people would come up to me and say, "Oh my goodness, how do you do it?" How do I do what? How do you go out there and play when 40,000 people are screaming at you? How do you do that? Well, guess what they're listening to?
Yeah.
Guess what they're hearing?
Yeah.
They're hearing the noise. Guess what I learned to do? To quiet the noise.
Hmm.
And what I would say to them is, no, you don't understand. Once I cross that white line, it's perfectly quiet for me out there. Okay? I have learned to enter into the quietness of the game that is occurring at that moment, and all of the noise out there, see, is having no effect on me whatsoever because I've learned to quiet it. Oh, gee, they even made a movie about that with Kevin Costner, right?
Yes. Yeah.
See, and that's exactly what happens there. It's not that the noise is there. The noise in that particular instance can either be one of great enthusiasm, it can be in opposition, it can be in support. It has a lot of different dynamics going on, but it cannot control the game. See, it is just a product of the game. Well,
Well, and you,
guess what? All of this collision is a product of us being in the game.
yep. Yeah.
What are you going to do with it?
Wow, there's so much there. There's so much in that metaphor. Here in Texas, Texas A&M University is known for the 12th man.
Yes, right. My
And
son-in-law and I were just talking about that the other day.
well, and why do they call it the 12th man? And if you've ever been to a Texas A&M football game, everyone stands the entire game. And this
Yeah,
is like students and everybody stands the entire game. And they take collectively upon themselves the title of the 12th man,
yeah,
meaning that they play on the field with the team.
yeah,
And if you think about that, it's such a great analogy to what you're talking about with a game and with noise. What is this idea that I can interfere and we can interject into the game with
yeah,
the noise that we make? And it's so amazing how God has used you in your professional baseball career and use that metaphor in teaching. right? And
Yeah.
helping people understand the nature of being a professional and what that means. I was sitting on my porch the other morning. I got up just probably too early and it was dark and I got my coffee and it was finally like, in the 70s where I actually could sit outside. And
Yes.
we're next to a creek, and I'm sitting there and I've got tinnitus. I don't know, old men I guess get this, right? Where you've got this ringing sound in your ears and it's
And what that does.
constant. Yeah,
Yeah.
constant, constant, constant. And I was sitting out there and I was listening to my tinnitus and it's like, this ringing. And then it was interesting. I was like, well, what is my focus on? And then I hear um the birds or something. I hear something in the background. The birds are waking up. Well, when I'm listening to the birds, I don't hear the tinnitus. And then I was like, hold on, I can hear the highway. But when I'm listening to the highway, I don't hear the birds.
Yeah.
And then the water goes over we got a bridge there and there's water that goes over it. And I was actually thinking about this, how my intention determines the focus of what I actually hear. And I think that you don't realize that it's layers.
Yes.
And if you think about noise as layers, because you're saying that I cross that white line and it's silent. Well, part of this is that discipline, but also part of this is, what is necessary? Because you, the man that God created, has the ability to focus his attention on certain things. And
Yeah.
you can block out other things. And it's such a great metaphor for, the spiritual walk and life of speaking with Jesus, is that most people don't believe that he speaks. And the funny story, because you mentioned the base layer code, I was talking to Ray this morning, and it was like he's a coder, right? And we know
Yeah.
technology, and we're on a computer screen right now. And I'm like, you go to a form, and you're looking at the web page, and that's what's called a graphic user interface, a GUI they call it.
Yeah.
And you can use the drop down menu, and in the drop down menu, you've done this. You've picked the state that
Yeah.
you're in, right? Well, Ray was saying, well, you can look at the source code, right? So you can right mouse click and look at view source, and you can see that on that page in the HTML with the JavaScript that works with the form, you can see all the lists in the HTML. But then he said, here's what I could also do for you. I could show you that behind this web page, right, is the browser code. And I can turn on the developer tools and we can actually see what it's pulling from the web and how it's assembling this page. And then he said, I can go into the actual computer itself and I can go to um, I can literally go to the code layer, right? I can, it's funny how he's always in the base layer. He's doing things from the command prompt. And then he's like, well, it even goes further than that. We can get into the kernel of what, runs this. And then behind that, we've got the machine code down to zeros and ones. And what was amazing about that idea is that we're building, and part of who we are when we build and create is we can't help but create in the way that the creator made us.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that what we create is layered.
Yeah.
And in that layering process, if we do it in a way that's beneficial, is that it becomes more usable. But it's amazing to me that God said, I am.
Yeah.
And you think about how we do code. And what's amazing about I am is now that we know qubits and we understand the nature of quantum state, that actually who he made us to be determines it,
Yeah.
which is wonderful. But this idea of I am, alpha and omega, but I am is a one. I
Yeah.
exist.
Yeah.
And what I love about that in all of this whole metaphor is the fact that, do you know you can look at the source code?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the story, right? You
Yeah.
can. You don't have to just deal with the noisy user interface, because the user interface is trying to distract you with flaming logos and animations and noise. And there's just this constant beckoning that doesn't insist that you follow it, but that you could see what's behind the curtain. And wow, what a great, metaphor from you, from Ray. Just wow.
Yeah.
That and I think a lot of this is just to say, what's the access to this? And I come back to the right side up with Steve Staggs. Jesus is alive and he speaks. Do you want to see what he has for you? And that's it's so powerful and so refreshing.
Well, you think about, if you look at the planet where we are right now, this place is pretty sophisticated.
Yeah. Yeah.
The systems that have been put in place to enable life to happen at um, an amazingly efficient rate uh, are pretty impressive. If you just say, wow, okay, so I take this credit card, I want to buy something, I buy it, and it's done. And the next thing I know, I got a bill. And so when I want to pay that bill, how do I pay that bill? Oh, I just click another button and it's paid. So from a system standpoint, uh, we live in a pretty daggone sophisticated era. And it's going to get more so. Okay. The question is, how are those systems going to be used? Well, what we see right now is there is nothing visible except to be seen. There's nothing hidden except to be revealed. Whatever comes to light is fully visible. Whatever is visible is light. All of those words and terms and concepts we're experiencing. So how are we, when we pause and we see, look at the systems and we say, how are the systems now being used? Are these systems being used to bless and protect, or are these systems being used to exploit and extract? Well, guess what? The systems are neutral.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so let's say you look at that and you say, oh, these systems, and you attribute to the system that it's screwed up, and so it needs to be replaced. Okay, fine, let's do that. Let's take that approach. Well, when you're in charge of that new system, is it going to operate any differently than the system that currently is in operation? Okay. So what are we talking about in all of this? The noise of just seeing things superficially is distracting us from dealing with the reality of what is causing that noise, and more importantly, why that noise is there to begin with.
Yeah.
Now we're back to, guess what? I want to go to the 1 and the 0. I want to go to the alpha and the omega. I want to go to the one who is yes and no.
Yep.
It's all the same idea. It's all the same concept. There's a yes and there's a no. There's a purpose for the yes to empower so as to mobilize. There's a purpose for the no to protect. In the base code, there's a yes and there's a no. Yes, you may do anything you wish because you have the liberty to choose. No, you probably shouldn't do that alone. You need to do it with me. So in every single situation we come in contact with, we're making yes, no, 1, 0 decisions.
Yeah.
That's the liberty of choice. How are we? So insofar as this stream is concerned, it's like, look, let's not get involved in the noise of religion and perspectives of religion. Let's be a little more sophisticated in our thinking by just saying, hey, let's go to the guy who built the daggone thing.
Yep.
See, and say, hey, is it for real? Is all of this stuff that we're going through, am I a victim and there's nothing I can do about this? Is this a foregone conclusion? Well, Steve, you tell me. Well, what do you mean tell you? Well, I gave the planet to you and your brethren.
Yeah.
Your fellow guys. What are you going to do about it? I'll help you all along the way. I'll be right there with you. By the way, Steve, if you haven't noticed, I'm doing my own thing here, and you have a choice to participate in that. So what are you going to do? How are you going to use your 1, 0, your 0, 1, your yes, no? How are you going to exercise that? See, so from a metaphorical standpoint, it all boils down to the same thing. The collision of the noise is there to tell you something if you learn to approach it, properly.
Yeah.
You'll either use it to benefit you or you will use it to distract you.
Yeah, wow. It's amazing. Just to extend this out even further, you know, we describe these systems that we create, right? You talked about the credit card, right? Hey, it's amazing. We layer this stuff on. It used to be really hard to do this, and now we made it easier for you. We constantly are adding these layers. It's also interesting that the systems all have an author, right?
Yes.
Every one of them does. The credit card systems have an author. The company's got an author. The person who made your shirt has an author. Somebody designed it. And it's interesting is the gaming industry. It's funny how technology gets adopted, right? I think they say that porn and gaming are really the early adopters of like everything.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is the gaming industry in 2022 was $217 billion. $217 billion is the gaming industry, and this is the full thing. Okay, so it's pretty big size of the economy. Well, think about a game, and then why would people spend time building games? And what are the popular games? The popular games are where you control a character that you've built. Okay, this is the base of most games that we create. So, as an indication that we're building in the same way that he is built, we'll create an environment
Yeah.
and a simulation. And the games that are really taken off are the ones in which you customize your character. Right. And so I got to speak to my kids' school and I wanted to have something they could relate to. And I said, let's say we're game designers and, we're going to build this environment and we're going to put down this character and I'm going to get him all this stuff and I'm going to work with him and he's going to go through all the quests and he's going to do all this stuff. He's going to get really cool armor and a shield and a sword or a gun or whatever. I'm going to play with him and it's going to be great. And, my son, he plays Minecraft. He's like, Dad, let me show you what I built because there's pride in this ownership of what you've created,
Yeah.
even in an online game. And just imagine this, I think about you got a controller and you're proud. You're like, yeah, I'm wearing this skin. I've got this, weapon and, my hair's this way. And we customize this thing. And imagine that character looking back up at you, right? Because usually you're in kind of first person shooter or maybe third person. And imagine like it breaks and the character looks back at you and says, clip and cuts the cord
Yeah.
and goes their own way. And I was thinking about this as far as it's a loose analogy or metaphor to this, but this idea that if my computer crashes, I kind of feel bad. If the game glitches out and it's over, I'm like, man. But if you really were to take this to the extreme and you said, no, my character that I spent all this time building and animating and doing all these things to help him have this awesome quest, and we go through all of these challenges together, decides he's going to go his own way. And I imagine, looking in on that game occasionally, going, "Hey, there's that Steve guy. Really liked him. He was really cool." And I think about that from the perspective of us creating things. This is kids, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when your son, he was little and he knew dad needed money. Remember when he wrote and he drew on that thing and he put money on it and he's like, "Here, dad, here's some money." And you're like, "Man, I wish I could." Those days, wow, how special and precious was that? And then, there are a lot of people who have kids that are wayward, right? They're just like, we did all these things and it's like you decided to go this direction. And of course, that's the noise of this world. And this amazing concept is here we are creating just like he created, albeit, it pales in comparison, but it is a comparison of, I think, the religious world that has this agenda and animates these tools, sometimes not to bless and protect. Um, we we see that we are those who what was the intention of the creator of this game? The creator of this game is that we would do it together.
Yeah.
And I think what's just so powerful is this idea that The devil's lie, Satan's lie is that he is not alive and he does not speak, and you are alone and you're the descendant of a monkey. And if I can convince you that there's nothing more, there's no good and there's no evil, there's no dark and there's no light, there is no hope, and you aren't who he says you are. And it's like, this is something special is happening uniquely here, because in a way, I think people lament the fact that the church is not growing, right? The church, right?
Yeah.
But in my opinion, there's a renaissance because we're getting to the base layer. It's like we're getting rid of the other noise to say, no, Jesus said that to the Samaritan woman at the well. It's just like there's a day when you will worship in spirit and truth. You will go direct. You don't have to go to the temple in Jerusalem that you're not allowed to go to.
Yeah.
No, you have direct access to him. I love it, man.
Yeah. No, the simplicity of the idea that if you want to know the answer, go to the source.
Yeah.
That's what this is about. If you're ill, you want to go to the doctor so the doctor can do what? Tell you what the source of your illness is.
Yep.
See, if you got a toothache, you go to the dentist, and what are you expecting from your dentist? To tell you what the source of the toothache is. Why is that important? Because they can't fix the problem without going to the source. Otherwise, all they do is mask the effect without dealing with the source. And guess what? It usually ends up happening. It becomes so severe that it becomes life threatening. Well, we're kind of in that role, that place right now. See, we're looking all around us, particularly in this country, and we're saying, wow, our very means of existing as a nation is being threatened. Why? Because there is something at the source that is so perverse that it's causing us to decay and rot from the inside out, and we're watching it collapse before our very eyes. That's what happens. And so it's like, no, wait a minute. How does this relate to, we hold these truths to be self-evident. See, what are those self-evident truths? See, well, that we are superior to the governments.
Yeah.
We are superior to the apparatus. We are superior to the document. We are superior to these things. We are not victims. We are the ones who decide whether the thing that is victimizing will continue or will be terminated.
Yep.
We decide that. And that realization, I'm not advocating anything more than go back to the source and let him adjust your perspective enough to where you can see these things from his point of view, rather from the viewing of the noise that's coming at you.
Yep.
Let the noise work for you, not against you. Okay. When I'm at bat and the noise is screaming to try to distract me, and I am quiet and hit the ball out of the ballpark, guess what happens to the noise?
It increases.
See? If it's against me, it's silenced. If it's for me, it explodes. So what is superior to the noise? See?
You.
I mean, it's virtually everywhere. We just don't know how to, and have never been taught how to deal with the noise. Now, not from this macro. Now, there are places inside. I've just given you an example in sports. We're taught how to deal with noise in sports. In fact, we're actually taught how to get inside the head of the opposing player to create internal noise.
Yep.
Through the use of external noise. It can be verbal, it can be expressing, expressive. It can be through implicate. It can be a lot of different ways, but the idea is to get inside the head so their own internal noise starts to amp up. Okay? Well, guess what? The ones who are successful say, no, I want to quiet that, you know, and then deal with the opposition that's coming against, not being distracted by the noise that's trying to, keep me from dealing with that opposition. And we can go a lot of different ways on this. I mean, you know, whether it's people with family and situations and homes, husband and wives scream at each other. Why are you doing that? That's nothing but noise. Pause and say, hey man, why are we hollering at each other? What's the deal here? Let's quiet the noise for a minute and let it work, because it's actually telling us something if we'll listen to it. Anyway, go a lot of different directions, but
Yeah.
it's the same fundamental concept that's very practical.
Yep.
And so these streams are not trying to make anybody religious. It's trying to say, hey man, go back to the base code.
Yeah.
In the vocabulary of this stream.
Yeah. Well, this is a perfect transition. We've hit an hour, and what a transition. I wanted to talk about, let's make this really practical, because, we're on a crypto channel, and money, I mean, we kind of started with it. Your son making his own money, which I love, to where we're making our own money, and we know what that representation is. But one of the things I wanted to talk with you about, because it's really long-term deep thinking and talking to Jesus, that you have put together a slide in which outlines the transfer. I was reading an article. So I look at crypto news every day. And one of the things I saw in crypto news this morning was the fact that this next bull run could be, bigger than any we've ever seen before. And the case that they were making was that this was going to be the largest transfer of wealth we've ever seen in this next bull run. And the reason they said it was because the system, which has been built on, fractional reserve banking, in order for it to sustain itself, has to inject a tremendous amount of liquidity. Meaning, since we've been off the gold standard in Bretton Woods, basically my entire lifetime, I was kind of born right when it all happened in the early 70s to today. We're reaping what we've sown. And that is this idea of debt and leverage. And we're coming up in this time where, if you look at the historic GDP versus debt, sovereign debt of nations, we've exceeded 100%. And in many cases, it's well beyond that. And in the past, we just said, we'll just grow out of this, and I remember in 1996, or it was during the Clinton, it was like the first time we ever balanced a budget in my lifetime. And it's interesting how this Keynesian approach to economics would be, we just turn the money printer on. And of course, we've seen hyperinflation. We've seen issues of people trying to just, print their way out of problems. But this article was basically saying that the system's broken, which we know it is, but there's only one lever to pull if we want this to continue and not collapse. And so I want to use that structure of this is the peach that's rotting from the inside out, right? And we see people that are trying to maintain it, having to add energy to it, in this case, printing more money.
Yeah.
But in this, there's a difference between money and currency. Currency is a representation of money, and money is a proxy for human labor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up on the screen. I'm like literally trying to pitch you one nice and slow and right down the middle. So I'm going to share a screen here, and I'm going to find this document. And this is something you shared with me early on. And folks, I want you, if you care about money in the future, which I know you do, you're going to want to listen very carefully to this conversation. So this is going to be the second half of our discussion here. You know it, you feel it, Mr. Anderson, when you go to church and pay your taxes,
Mhm.
that there is a transfer coming. And I think the secular world would say, well, the baby boomers are passing away and a lot of money's going to come over to the younger folks. That's not what we're talking about, although there's a piece of it. What is the transfer, Steve? And what is this slide here? Because it is got a lot packed in it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is in this slide, we could probably spend a month of streams
Yeah.
just unpacking what what this slide is representing.
Agreed.
I mean, it really is true that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this slide is worth about 100,000 words
Yeah.
because in each part of it, it portrays a different picture. So I'll just start by saying, in the hour that we have, we'll kind of keep this at a very, very high level. And then if you want in future streams to go through it in more detail, we certainly can. Um, the basic concept here is that um, there is an economic model represented by both sides of this slide. If you see the blue box in the middle where it says wealth repositories, person, business, institutions, if you kind of draw an imaginary line, vertical line on that, and everything on the left side of the slide is what's currently operating, and what's on the right side of the slide is what is beginning to operate. And there is when we talk about the transfer from the standpoint from a wealth perspective, there is a transfer occurring from the wealth that is represented on the left side of the slide to the right side of the slide. Okay. Now, the effect of that is that as that occurs, that's what the dollar signs are representing. As that occurs, then there is a depletion of wealth on the left side and an increase of wealth on the right side. The left side of the system is the left side of the slide um, is referred to as the wealth extraction system, which basically says this is what the intention of that side of the slide is. And this is the perverse application, excuse me, that's the wrong word, the perverse administration of the wealth system that God created. So this is really a high level spiritual view of what is occurring that will then take shape in in the material world that we live in. And so what is this really all about? On the left side of the slide, um, you mentioned that the system is broken. What I'd like to offer is a slightly different perspective. The system is not broken. The character animating it is rotting. And so what it's doing is it's destroying the intended capability of the system. Now we're back to what you've described before, the gun on the table. See, the systems are neutral. Now, they may, a system that is built to harm, when the right person animates that system can be modified to bless. See? So systems are all neutral. Once again, if you take a system that is intended to harm, if you put the right person in there, they just render the system inoperable. They just don't use it. See, so it becomes worthless. So the thing to recognize is that we have creative abilities because we are made in the image and likeness of God. We possess His physical attributes. We also possess the elements of his nature and character that he develops over time. And so he teaches us how to build systems. Satan hasn't built a one of these, by the way. He does not have creative abilities. That is reserved for the Elohim man, as we've talked about, who is operating with his God, who has creative abilities. Creativity is one of the fundamental elements of choice. And so the creative mind says, here's what exists. How do I make that better? Oh, that's the exercise of choice. It's the evaluation of circumstances. It's the determination of value. And then there is a modification that occurs as a result of creative abilities. We call it innovation. Same concept. So Satan hasn't created a thing. He just hijacks what has been created. So he has taken the wealth production system that God has built, entrusted that to man, and then he has perverted it. And how has he perverted it? He has turned it, if you look on the right side, he's converted it from a wealth production system to a wealth extraction system. Now, the issue with that is that when you extract wealth, eventually you extract too much of it. And when you extract too much of it, what happens is you have none left over to reproduce it. So there is a failure element built into it because it's perverse. So what does this wealth extraction system do? It exploits, it controls, it distracts, it punishes, it steals from the enslaved who are the wealth producers. If we pause for just a moment and say, who is it that produces wealth and how is wealth produced? In both questions, there is something at the center of that, and that center is mankind.
Yep.
See? Wealth cannot be produced apart from man.
Yep.
That's as simple as it is. So man is the wealth producer. And how does he produce wealth? He takes the resources that he did not create and then utilizes those resources to produce value in excess of what they possess on their own. Okay? So a grain of wheat that's growing wild out in the field that the man sees some deer eating on, he's hungry, he goes out there, he chews on himself, says, wow, I can eat this too. What does he do? He then takes his innovative capabilities, he clears out the land, and he just takes that seed and he builds it to where there's an entire field out there that now supplies food for both him and everybody that he knows. The deer doesn't know how to do that.
Yep.
The deer doesn't have the capability, the innovative capability to do that. Only man possesses that capability. So what Satan does on his side is he wants to control that capability. And when he controls that capability, he will allow the wealth producer to receive what you and I have called the cost of wealth. He will not allow him to receive a portion of the wealth that he produces. And right there is the mechanism of enslavement. Okay? So that's on that left side. What that left side has to do is that left side has to, in order to keep the wealth producer continuing to labor and labor and labor, so it produces the margin that we call wealth above his labor, he has to create a scarcity delusion. He has to create the impression that scarcity exists when in reality there's an abundance that exists. All of creation tells us of the abundance that is here. You look in the ocean at the fish, you look at the fields with the crops, you look at the buffalo that were in herds of millions, in the plains. It does not matter where you look. The stars that are in the sky, the entirety of the creation is screaming at us its abundance. And yet we are told that we live in scarcity.
Yeah.
Okay?
Can
Now,
I interject
yes,
here for just one second?
yes,
I just want to
yes,
review this because this is huge for anyone who is watching this now live or later. There is so much packed here that is it's just mind numbing. But if you're somebody that's in crypto like I am and you are, this is so fundamental to your understanding because people kick around these words all the time and you're going to hear the base layer here. And I just want to reiterate what you said because it's so powerful. At the top of this slide, it says the transfer money, wealth, and wealth producers. Right underneath it, it says all wealth is a product of human labor. So, this one massive point is everything that is related to wealth is based on the creativity of God's man, and that's you and me.
yep,
What's interesting here is that red arrow that says mammon, right? And in parentheses, it says Satan. It says current world order, money is God. Will you explain those three statements there and how that is characteristic of this left-hand side?
yes. Um, once you get the general concept of what this left side of the slide is intending to do, what it's designed to accomplish, and how it functions. Once you at that fundamental level, now you can go in and you can step back and start asking the questions: why? Why does it function like this, and who caused it to function in that manner? Okay, so why does it function in this way? So as to extract resource. Well, why is there a need to extract resource? To finance intention.
Yeah.
What do you want to do when you finance intention? Accomplish an outcome.
You know
Okay.
what's so awesome about that? It's so funny you say that because in crypto, everyone says when Lambo. It's a joke, right? It's a meme. But this is really great. I just want to say it because it hit me really well. It's like, what am I planning in my mind to do with the excess?
Yeah.
That's like what's driving most people in crypto. They're
Yeah.
basically going, when this next bull run comes, this time I'm not going to be, I'm going to be able to have some liquid so that I can make sure I sell at the top, right?
Mhm.
And I'm going to maximize the extraction that I get that's disproportionate to me because I'm smart and I made good decisions and I have my fluffy slippers on. And I'm going to plan what I'm going to do or what I think that excess money is going to do for me and the things I care about when Lambo.
Yes.
I love
And
that.
by
That
the
intention, it fuels intention. I love that.
and guess what? You don't use your base investment to do that.
Right?
You use the margin to
Yeah.
do that.
That's right. That's right.
See? Well, guess what? That's because you're the one who gets the margin. But what would happen if somebody else heisted that margin?
Yeah.
See? Well, guess what? They would use it for their purposes
Yeah.
to do exactly what they want, to produce it and finance the outcomes that they're looking for. Okay, so who is that? Who is it that's doing the extracting? Okay, well, now we're back to this. Okay, all wealth is a product of human labor. Yep, the human exerts their labor. That labor produces an abundance beyond what they use to produce that wealth. There is a margin that occurs. Well, who gets to use the margin? Well, on the left side of the slide, the one who's extracting that margin is this one in the parentheses called mammon, Satan in parentheses. Now, for those who have spent time um, in the New Testament and studying any of the things that Jesus um, has said, he made this one statement that says you cannot serve God and mammon. He begins that statement by saying you cannot serve two masters or two lords. So what he does is he likens mammon to a lord, a master, in the same way that he identifies God as a Lord and a Master. Now we know God is a Lord and a Master, but who is this Lord and Master that he calls Mammon? Well, his name in the heavenlies, we call him Satan, but in the heavenlies, Satan is known as Mammon. He is the Lord. He is the Lord of the system that he has hijacked. And what he does is, out of this current world order, this system has designed to produce an order, meaning it is a mechanism that is designed to achieve an outcome. Okay? Anybody who has a family knows that in your family, you have a particular order. The family operates in an orderly manner. Some people may look at that as disorder. Some people may look at that as hyper order. It doesn't matter. It's a form of order. It is the way that your family operates. It is not only the processes, the intentions, the procedures for how it works when the kids go to bed, school, et cetera, et cetera. You get that part of it. Well, that's the same thing. The current world order, Satan has arranged this and administered this to function in a particular way to achieve an outcome that enables him to extract the wealth in order to use that wealth to produce his intentions, his plan. Okay? So that's what that order does. And he does that by making money God. Now, what do we mean when we say money is God? Well, the fundamental role of God is to, when we think of it, we think of God as the creator, yes, but more so we think of God as the one who has absolute rule and authority. It is the all-powerful. It is the almighty. God is all-powerful, almighty, all-knowing. Okay? And so money is positioned to be God. In other words, money is the thing that enables all things to be done or to keep other things from being done. Now, the way that we've heard it in the past is, he who holds the gold makes the rules. Well, what is that saying? I have the gold, i.e. the money, and when I have the money, I get to be God. I get to make all the rules.
Yep.
Well, that's exactly what's happened on the left side of the slide. By making money God, God becomes the thing, the most powerful element within his order. It becomes the thing most sought after. It becomes the thing most prized. It becomes the thing that tells you it is capable of doing whatever you want done. Whatever dream you have, whatever need you must resolve, it will provide that for you. Money is God. And so what happens is, the way that looks is, for example, we'll just talk about people even in the church. I believe God has called me to the ministry. Okay, well, what is usually the first question? If you've ever talked with anybody, who has come to you and asked you for advice or counsel about that, the very first question they'll have is, how am I going to make a living?
Yep. Yep.
Well, what are they referring to? The money called God. And when Jesus says you can't serve that guy, because the moment you put money in the position of being the first question, you have elevated that thing to the highest point of power in your life.
Wow. Steve, it just dawned on me, and I hadn't ever thought about this the same way. When he sent out the disciples, he told them not to take anything with them.
That's exactly right.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And then he asked them at the end, when you were with me, was there anything that you lacked?
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay. So like I said, we could spend on virtually every line item here. We could spend an entire episode on these things because it is just that rich and deep.
Well, this is the red pill, folks. This is the Matrix red pill. So let me ask you this, because this dawns on me too. So, we hear in historic, terms, the concept of slavery,
Yeah,
right? We look at the Bible and we look at the Israelites being enslaved. And so what we have as our understanding of slavery is that you are held against your will.
yeah,
And you're like, well, we were in captivity. We were in bondage. And what's really interesting about this is we just talked about infinite resolution. We talked about, how these things repeat themselves, how we see this as the form and function of creation. And let me ask you this. And is this a good connection? In this current world order where God or money is God, and that we are basically we would commonly say, well, yeah, slavery's bad. Child sex slavery's bad, and slavery in America was bad, and slavery back in the day was bad. But the cleverness of the fact that this system is actually the same thing, that it
yes,
is literally enslaving us because we're essentially giving our authority over to it. And we're saying, yeah, my God is money.
yep. That is it. That is
And,
exactly right. And
and you are captive to it.
test it out. You want to do something? What is the first thing you're going to ask? How am I going to pay my bills?
Yep.
My, Now, we can get into philosophical arguments about or discussions about that all day long. But look at, we're talking in this stream about, this base code
Yeah.
element.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is the base code? On the left side of the slide, the base code is there has been a hijacking of God's financial system, and that hijacking has converted it from a wealth production system to a wealth extraction system that exploits and controls and enslaves. And the way it does that is by making money God.
Is
And if
this?
you question that, ask yourself what the first question is you ask if you want to do something that causes you to put your labor in question, or
Yeah.
who you have given your labor to. If
Wow.
you remove that, what do you then do? Oh my goodness, I've got to I've got to pay the bills. I can't do what you asked me to do, God. How am I going to pay the bills?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, just pause for a second and unpack that very legitimate concern that we don't know how to deal with because it is noise that distracts us from the fundamental question.
It seems like this is another lie. Okay.
Yes.
So we've talked about in the beginning, the serpent, Satan gets into the garden through the serpent and lies to Eve. And what I think is so amazing about this is, and help me know if I got this right, that when, what is Mammon doing? What is Satan doing in this scenario? Is once again doing what he does, lies. And in that lie is exploitation, control, distraction, punishing, enslavement. But it's a lie again. It's saying that, one, there is no God, but two, your God shall be money. And that's the system. That's how I will enslave you, is I will get you to agree with me that you can't do anything without my controlling God, which is money.
Yes. Um, but if you were to say that overtly, we'd
Right, right.
all flip him the bird.
And that's what we're saying. That's
Yeah.
why we're here.
Yeah. That's why we're here saying, okay, what we're doing is we're putting vocabulary to what he's saying.
Yeah.
We're penetrating through the noise and the distraction and the misdirection. See? And so the issue is not that man is not to work. The issue is not that man is not productive. The issue is not that man exercises choice. It's that man, when he exercises choice, that becomes his sovereign decree. for himself. So if you think strategically and you're on the left side of the slide and your name is Mammon and what you're trying to do is extract the wealth produced by that man, would you go in and put a gun to his head and say either give me your bank account or you're dead? Well, that could be effective for a single event, but what would you do? You would try to convince him that your system, your order, is the appropriate order that blesses and benefits him. Okay? And so he gives himself or herself to the order. Okay, so let's kind of get a look at how this works, the cycle of this, so that we can then go into some of the details of it. What happens is, once again, on the left side of the slide, wealth must be pooled in order to create this illusion, this delusion of scarcity. And so what you begin to see in this is that this wealth, the excess wealth that man is able to produce, that's nearly inexhaustible, it has to go somewhere. Now, in the parable of the man who built the crops and was so prospered that he had to build all of these barns and stuff, that's a picture. It just keeps filling up.
BlackRock.
Well, there would be an example of BlackRock. That's right. See,
there's some barns.
There are some barns out there. There are individuals called Bezos that is a barn, where these exorbitant amounts of wealth are produced and they have to be pooled. So they go into now this blue kind of rectangle in the center called a wealth repository. These could be individuals, these could be businesses, these could be institutions, but the idea is there has to be a place where the excess wealth is transferred to and then pooled in order to create this illusion of scarcity.
Steve, we're telling our men in this culture that if you don't produce and pool, and we're going to give you a card, a report card. It's going to be, you're going to be judged. Who you are is based on this number in this bank account, in this barn. And that the culture has told men especially that you're not anyone of value unless you can pool this money.
Yeah.
We're swimming in the depths of that in crypto. That who you are is your bank account, and this is the scorecard. And if you got a big scorecard, you're a winner. And what you're saying here, this lie that's been told, I mean, it's pervasive through this system, is that who you are is what you can produce, and who you are is what you can pool. And the people that we admire in our culture, and it's exactly this lie, is the Bezos, right? It's the Musk. It's the people who have pooled as much as possible. And the world, in the culture, rewards those and says, you are a winner.
Yes. And guess what this money god does? It gives you power.
Yeah.
See, if you will play by my rules and make me your God, I will give you power.
Isn't that what Satan said to Jesus coming out of the wilderness? He's like, exactly. turns these stones into bread. I'll give you this whole thing.
Yep. I'll give it all to you if you just bow down and call me your superior. That's what the definitions of the words say. Bow down before me and declare me as your superior. I will give you all of this. And Jesus says, no, that doesn't how it works. By the way, it's already mine.
So,
You're not giving me anything. It's already mine.
so would a term to add to the left-hand side of this slide be power?
Well, power is part of it.
Yeah.
That's part of the reward. That's what incentivizes those individuals, businesses, and institutions to participate as reservoirs, as repositories of the wealth, because what they gain in response is power. I mean, think about the amount of power that Bezos, um, any of them, Musk, uh, you just go right down the line.
Yeah.
See, just think of the enormous amount of power that they have. But what do we do all the time? We look at, we call George Soros the big bad wolf, and we say, look at all these things he's doing because he's got this whacked out, way that he wants to control the world, yada, yada, yada. No, he has no political agenda other than to create disruption. Why? Because he's a currency trader. And the world currency is US dollars. So where is the greatest value to be extracted on the left side of the slide except through the mechanism of volatility? The greater the volatility, the greater the margin, the more wealth I extract.
Well, and you know what's amazing too is I keep hearing these things, Jesus speaking through the word. You can even take this to favoritism. Jesus talks about, hey, don't just take the person who's dressed really nice and has the ring and does all this stuff and put them in this high place.
Yeah.
And I think what's amazing is how much commentary there is from Jesus around this model and
Yes.
saying, listen, you're going to, think about this. Elon Musk shows up at your door, Jeff Bezos, we fawn over people, and that's this power that they exert, right? Celebrity, money is people we have in our culture, especially, we admire this power and we give it energy by giving favoritism to those who exert it over us.
Yes. And now we say, why? Because they are our gods. We don't think about it in those terms overtly,
Right.
but that is exactly what happens. Oh, if I want something, think about this, for a minute from an investment standpoint. A friend of ours has been going through this for some time, trying to make this break. That what do? Oh, I need money in order to be invested in my project so that I can do what God asked me to do. So what do? You go to the people with money and you try to sell them on your idea that, this is a good investment. What are you doing that for? Because you're asking for them to provide you the power that is necessary in order for you to get your project done. And the moment you do that, you are now declaring money as your God, and you're not even thinking in those terms. It's a noise that has become so common to us, we don't even recognize that it's there. And yet we do it all the time.
So, okay. So let me use a practical example of this.
Okay.
So I'm somebody who says, "Hey, Jesus, you're the only one that has authority to speak to me.
Yeah.
I'm going to listen to you. And I'm going to hear from you, and you're going to have a calling." So one of the callings I talk about a lot is unlocking global generosity by giving, right? He's given me a lot of pictures of that. He's given me physical items that reinforce that and all of these things.
Yes.
And what I hear you saying directly to me in this is he either spoke to you or he didn't, Matt. Either he spoke to you something that he wants to partner with you on. Okay, so let's just make that assumption. Yes, and I believe that's true, but let's just say this with anyone. You understand that he calls you out to something. And what you're saying is in the practical, we often go back to Mammon and Satan and this God money and say, this is the reason I can't do this thing that God's called me to because I don't have the money.
Yeah.
And this is what this is saying to me is if in fact Jesus is speaking to you, it's because He is the vine, you're the branches, and he has something for you to do. If you recognize that he owns it all,
Yeah.
that actually provision isn't primary, it's barely secondary. That actually you following him and you moving forward with him in partnership with him, that actually the result of that following is provision.
That is it. We haven't gotten to the right side of the slide
I
yet.
know, isn't it crazy?
We're just talking
We have
about the left
40
side.
minutes on Satan today.
Well, it's important because this
It
is
is.
where we are. If you're going to get someplace, there's two pieces of information that are absolutely vital. One is where you're going, but the other is where you are. And so this is where we are in this slide. And so you're exactly right, Matt, when you're hearing that, is that if Jesus is saying, I need you to do something, I need you to partner with me, Matt, to unlock global generosity through the mechanism of giving, you have a choice. You can take off on that on your own and try to make it in your own deal, or you can say, okay, Jesus, how do you want to do that?
Yeah.
That question will determine which side of the slide that you're going to operate on. If you take it and move it on your own, which by example, well, Jesus, how am I going to pay the bills? Okay, I'll tell you what, you provide me the money first and then I'll do it. Well, isn't that my story with the house a few episodes ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jesus, what do you want me to do? I want you to go. If I told you, you wouldn't believe me. Okay, I get it. I'll take you at your word. I'm not going to believe you, but I don't have a choice. What do you want me to do? I got 20 bucks left. I got two little kids and a wife out there who is wondering what the heck wacko dad is up to this time, right? What do you want to do? Tell me. I want you to go buy a house. Right on. Apparently you haven't checked my bank account lately. I got 20 bucks. What was the first thing that I said to him? Well, hey, if you want to provide me with $25,000, I'm happy to do that. What have I done at that moment?
Yeah. You've inserted.
Yep.
Different God.
I have inserted the superiority of money over the command of the one who owns it all. Now, why did I do that? Because I didn't understand how this thing works.
What an invitation it is, and you see so many examples of this too, where, what we think is the structure it's so disruptive. Jesus calling you out of the boat, or like, this idea that, well, I don't know how I'm going to do this, and him literally saying, don't take anything with you. And, we think about, there's so many stories. We've heard this so many times, right? Somebody gets fired from a job and they're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And so many times people look back in retrospect at these things and they're like, you know what? I burned the boats, man. I just went for it. And it is amazing how these things came. And it was the defining difference is that, I guess I would use the term faith, but it's also, we talk about the packet of faith that is given to you. What an amazing thing what are we saying? All right, God wants to partner with you. He's alive and he speaks. Ask him. He wants to partner with you. Okay. Hey, I want you to unlock global generosity. Okay. That's the decree from the guy who owns it all. Let's move forward. And to think that what seems so practical in life, and a lot of very practical people would say, well, how are you going to finance that, Mr. Dreamer?
Yeah.
And it's so counterintuitive because the system itself has been set up to make money our God. It's amazing.
To distract us.
Yes.
So that we will continue to labor and produce wealth that can be extracted. Okay. Now the fallacy in the whole thing is the amount of wealth that is produced on the left side of the screen is a fraction of what is produced on the right side of the screen, but we haven't, but we'll get there eventually. Let's finish this concept again. Okay. Is okay, give me $25,000, God, and I'm more than happy to go out. So what have I done? I have made my partnering with him conditioned upon him subjecting himself to my requirement, which is to make God my money, my God.
Wow.
And the moment I do that, then everything that is produced out of that stays and cycles through the left side of the screen. You see the subtlety that's in there? And Satan didn't put a gun to my head. He just taught me how his system works, how his order functions, and I just naturally cooperate with it and go with it. And I don't even know I'm doing it. I think I'm being shrewd. I think I'm being responsible. I think I'm being, an upfront guy who's trying to take care of things. Well, what was the reality? Okay, Jesus, I'll do what you ask me to do. What did I do with that next decision? I set aside the God of money.
Hmm.
I set the master of mammon aside. What then happened within the next 4 hours? I was the owner of a house with $20 in my pocket.
Yep.
How does that happen?
Yep.
Well, because he owns it all. And he's proactive. He proacts, and when he speaks something, everything has already been put in place to accomplish the very thing he spoke. I send forth my word. It accomplishes the purpose for which I sent it. It will not return to me void or empty. I am God, not mammon.
What's funny is in our community, there's people doing TA left and right, looking at charts, trying to predict the future. We talk to people who are whales and all of these kind of things. And you've got all kinds of commentary on who's smarter, who's not, what we're watching, watching these cycles and everything. And, I think everyone's trying to get an edge, right? And so some of the people that have had some success in crypto, you're like, I was here since 2015 and I've been through these cycles and I know what they look like. Yeah, there's some wisdom in that. You've seen how these cycles work. But it's really so fundamentally a shift in your intention in your mind, because it's really difficult to be on the right hand side of this slide unless you're actually listening to him, because to have something that truly operates on the right hand side, it requires really his power, his calling, his direction, his plan that you come in alignment with. I was thinking about that as a calling. It's not something that it's like, no, this is what I'm doing, because he's out front, right? We've got this assumption that he's like, well, I need you. No, this is what I'm doing. And it's amazing to think that when we ask the living Jesus, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do next? I remember, thinking about the idea of holding each thought captive. Well, why would I do that? I do it because I recognize the fact that you own it all, and that you're the source of all life, and you're the source of all resourcing. And I don't do it so that I get money. I do it because there's so much wrapped up in it. There's so much benefit wrapped up in it, in namely peace and rest and fruit and joy and all of the things that come along with. And it's the thing, it's crazy. We put money in the place, and we essentially go out and try to rent peace, and it never fulfills us. Whatever it may be, drugs, alcohol, money, relationships, Lambos, we take the little hit of it, and that's the thing it gives you, is a little hit that satiates you for a little bit of time, but it leaves you empty without peace. And it's amazing, like there is this future, because it's interesting how we talk about this and it relates to wealth, but in reality, it's actually the right-hand side of the slide is wrapped up in so much more than wealth, right? It's this definition actually of the thing I think people are really longing for, which is actually peace.
Well, the see, once again, we have been taught that God reacts to our situation. And so what he's doing is God is now moving to do something on our behalf because he's going to deal with the perversions that occur.
Yeah.
No, that isn't how he operates. He does not react. That isn't what he does. So let's get to another one of these baseline elements. In the left side of the slide, there is a circulation that has to happen. There is the exertion of the wealth of the labor. There is the production of the wealth from that labor. That labor now has to be put somewhere as it grows and multiplies, and has to go into a wealth repository to be stored and pooled to create this illusion of scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
It then moves out of the wealth repository back into the current world order so that to enable Satan to finance his plan on the planet. And it keeps cycling through that, So what happens? The money, the wealth that's produced, Mammon pushes that wealth to the wealth repository. When he needs to, he'll call upon it. It will then come back up into the current world order and then recycle through that. It'll keep cycling. Well, the question is, how does that happen? What is the one thing that must occur in order for that left side of the slide to work?
Man's authority.
One thing. Well, that's what's necessary. So what must man do in order for his authority to become accessible and under the control of the current world order? What must man do? Well, here it is. He must act and decide apart from Jesus.
Wow.
That's what he has to do. He has to act and decide apart from Jesus. That's the one thing that has to happen. You remove that element, and this left side of the slide can't work. Okay, so what is it that makes the right side of the slide work by contrast? Everything you do is in partnership with and in response to what Jesus says to do. You do not do one thing apart from him. Oh, wow. Is that what you meant, Jesus, when you said you do not do one thing apart from the Father? That's right. See? Why? Because that's what makes the kingdom work. That's how it works. You operating apart from me is what makes the left side of the slide work. You operating with me is what makes the right side of the slide work. See, isn't that exactly what I had your brother Paul say to you? Anything that is not of faith is sin, is apart from me. What is sin, Steve? It's anything that's apart from you. No matter what it looks like, how good it looks like, or how bad it looks. Anything done apart from me is sin. Well, where does faith come from? Oh, through what you speak, Jesus. Yes. How is man supposed to live? By every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. That's how man is to live. That's how the right side of my slide works. So the left side of the slide works with you acting independent of me. That's what activates it. Okay? So you want to stop with all the nonsense that's going on the left side of the slide? Quit making decisions all by yourself. Learn to listen to me and partner with me. And guess what? I'll take you from the Hugo that you're operating on the left side to the Lambo on the right side that you've always dreamed about having. Okay? These two systems are so different in their makeup. The left side is a scarcity model. The right side is an abundance model. The left side is a poor representation of the very essence and capability of everything on the right side. Why do you think the Apostle John described heaven as having streets of gold?
Yeah.
See, The two worlds are universes apart in their, in their functioning capability and how they are expressed. It's just that we look at the left side of the slide and we think the Lambo that we drive is the ultimate.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, hey man, why don't you live in a Lambo? In a Lambo environment. You think that's the ultimate? You haven't seen anything.
You know what's amazing about this though? I mean, it's so huge. I'm just, I kind of get overwhelmed by this because it makes you examine your own actions, right? It makes you examine your actions, and it makes you examine your language. And how am I giving power to this recursive system of God as money, right? This money God. And what's amazing to me, we've been talking about what does it mean to be in the game.
Yeah.
Steve, you and I talk offline, and you know that we're in the game.
Yes.
And
We are
I had this
definitely in the game.
I had this experience the other day. I told you about this, but I want folks to hear this. I did a stream a couple streams ago, just freaking out. It was my hopium stream because I saw literally Jesus wink at me. It was like as amazing of a realization that all of this is real. And I constantly get those reminders, but this was one of the biggest ones. This is like a top 5 in my life. Folks, I'm I'm doing my best to follow the calling that Jesus has given me, which is to unlock global generosity by giving and examining that in all of its potential facets, right? But also just paying attention and being interested in what does this look like? Well, a friend of mine went to a conference on the other side of the planet and really didn't know why he went and met a couple that did exactly what we were looking for. But what's amazing is when we talked to them, they had exactly what, like, they were the exact right people for us to talk to, and it was not intentionally set up. It was by quote unquote accident, right? Serendipitous. Well, when you think about this, walking these things out, that if Jesus is out front, we recognize his voice, he's strategic, and we're an extension of him, right? We're not putting our hand to it because he's the one that's out front. Then what does he do? The woman, this couple that we talked to, for the last 10 years, they've been listening to Jesus talk about the transfer, this. And they just happen to be in an industry that we need to have a person that's an expert. And what was amazing about it, it wasn't the dynamics of the industry. It was the fact that these folks, we talked about the exact same thing. That this Jesus we talk about, which I think to a lot of people seems like, oh, yeah, you're God in the sky. No, no, no. The same exact thing that Jesus has been saying to me for the last 10 years, he's been saying to a couple that lives on the other side of the world. And when they heard it, I mean, literally, the hair stood up on the back of my neck. The two guys that were on with me started tearing up. And you go, what you're seeing is this manifestation of the truth, which is that this system on the left-hand side is a lie.
Yeah.
And then if you're willing to step out of the boat and you're willing to walk with him, and we don't put our hand to it because he's already done it. He already has predestined this since the beginning of time, that you were created for these purposes. And when you come in alignment with that, but here's the crazy thing, Steve, I'm not looking at it as the money.
No.
It represents a lot of money, but what's really amazing about it is it says, what does it say? The scripture that says, delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And I always, immaturely thought, oh, well, he's going to give me what I want. But in reality, when I follow him, he actually gives me the desires of my heart. It's
Yes.
his desires become my desires. And
Yes.
so I don't think about, well, if I have a bunch of money because dealing with this guy in this industry, I'll be able to buy a Lambo and people will get to look at me, and I'll get to wear the Rolex, and people will, I'll socially signal to them that I'm better than they are. No, what he's actually giving me in the desires of my heart is, imagine what could happen if this is unlocked. And here's the crazy thing, Steve. What he's saying is, he's saying about money at all.
No.
This is actually how I am revealing myself to my man.
Yeah, right. I mean, to the farmer, is the wheat the objective in the farmer? I mean, when no, that he doesn't go out there and covet the wheat. No, he partners with the creation. He releases his labor. He takes the produce, and what does he do with the produce? He blesses and protects if he's doing it right. He blesses his family. He blesses his friends. He protects the the requirements for nourishment of people around him. And then guess what he does? He takes that money and then he recycles it again. And it cycles through and it keeps cycling through. What's happening right now is we're operating on the left side of the slide. And one of the things I hope that that happens, it certainly happened with you and I and others, is we have begun to talk in terms of the left side and right side of the slide.
Yeah.
Let's Jesus, will you show us how to no longer energize the left side of the slide? Will you teach us how to take what you have entrusted to us to bring it into the right hand side of the slide?
And that's what we call the kingdom.
Where wealth can be produced, real wealth, just not money, real wealth.
You know what, Steve? There's a pitfall in this, and I find myself falling into this pit all the time. And I'm going to use a really extreme example to illustrate this pitfall. And we all fall into this, I feel like. Jesus, help me win the lottery.
Yeah.
So that I can do good for you.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a pitfall. And I'm seeing it in like Technicolor right now.
Yeah.
What we want is we want Jesus to produce for us so that then we can go our own way apart from him and participate on the left-hand side.
Yeah.
And the thing that I think is really important to note in all of this is that I think that's how we look at the bull run. I think that's how we look at crypto. And if anyone has participated and seen that kind of the mad gains, man, from my diamond hands, is what they have seen is that what you really want is the sin that I really want, right? That I've been coveting. And that is make me rich so I can be somebody. That'll hit you right between the eyes. Make me rich. I'll play in your right-hand side of your slide so I can go back to the left and get mine.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people who are preaching Jesus. This is the prosperity gospel thing. It's like, I'm going to use you to extract wealth so that I can go and be somebody on the left. And the biggest difference, and this is huge for me to recognize, is the fact that if I have anything, it's because of him. If I have breath, it's because of him. If I've got resources, it's because of him. And the interesting thing here is, what if you do find yourself in charge of 10 cities?
Yeah.
What if you do find yourself with authority? And then I look at this life and I'm going, hold on a second. This is the test of this life, is that are you going to be an extension of me? Because the way I operate, I have it all, and I operate by blessing and protecting. And now it makes so much sense to me, is that if we're to hold each thought captive, that whatever we have in plenty or in want, that it is all for the sake of following his purposes, because we then partner with him and the kingdom comes.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
his will is done. The problem is, I love this idea. Let's get rich, Steve. Let's live in a Lambo. But you know what I'm actually doing? It makes it reminds me, and it really tests my own heart to go, no, what I really want is I just want you to make me rich so that I can go over to this left-hand slide so I can be hanging out with Bezos on his boat. this is the big issue here, is that this kingdom of God, this following of Jesus, is not about you amassing wealth, but it's also not about making you feel guilty that you need to. Because I think what ends up happening is that people that have wealth, let's say you're somebody that's a big crypto whale and you've got a lot of money, the left-hand side of the slide, and especially within the ministry and Christian church left-hand side of the slide, is to make you feel guilty that you've got something and that
Yeah,
you need to be separate from him. Don't listen to him, listen to me. I'm the one guilting you for having money. So you need to give that to me. You
yeah.
need to help me in this left-hand side. And the difference is this: if you're somebody that's sitting on a bunch of resources, it I mean, the the answer is always the same, and that is Jesus is alive and he speaks. And if you ask him, he'll tell you. And that if we hold every thought captive, whether you have a lot of money or a little money, that's the way. And if he gives you the desires of your heart, then if he's willing to tell you about unlocking global generosity, well, he's damn sure he's going to tell you what to do with the next buck. But if you're not recognizing who he is, and there's so much incentive built into actually following him. It's where there's so much more than just the dopamine hit. Then what ends up happening is even the things that seem good might actually be evil. And that's why we must constantly be seeking the next step and holding each thought captive to what do you want me to do next? Because I almost feel like I even treat this goal, unlocking global generosity, as a destination, and it's not a destination whatsoever.
Well, one of the things, Matt, is when you look at Jesus in the New Testament, do you get the impression that he was bogged down?
No,
Do you think that he was burdened in his relationship with his father?
no,
Or do you get the sense that he was perhaps the most fluidly operating human being who's ever stepped on the planet?
yep,
See, he
yep,
just moved fluidly. In fact, he described it like the wind.
yeah,
You don't know where the wind's coming or going. You just see that it has impacted and affected you. That so is everyone who is led by the Spirit.
hmm,
See? No, what does that mean? You at first you're going to crab walk to do these things because it's such a new discipline in the way that you live. But eventually it becomes like breathing. There is no encumbrance. There is no burdening. It is the most fluid way of living that you can imagine. In fact, it's called being free. See, you can just flow with this. That's where how the right side of the slide works. Now on this slide, and before we wrap up here, probably need to wrap up at this point. This slide is about a system. This is how the orders work. But they work, both are dependent on man.
yep,
How we choose to exercise our choice. So the very first thing that has to be transferred from the left side to the right side is the human being, is the person. When you transfer the person, you transfer all that the person is and has, ever will be, ever will possess. And all of a sudden, what happens is the perversion of the left side begins to drop off, and you become reacquainted with how Jesus built his kingdom, his creation to function from the very beginning. So it's not him reacting, it's time for us to be invited into what has always been and always will be, the way that he designed his creation to function. So the first thing to be transferred is not a person's money, it's the very person themselves. When they're transferred, everything with them transfers along with them. And that's where we're going. That's part of this stream. For those who are interested, that's the invitation. Ask Jesus how that's done with you and just enjoy the ride.
To he who has ears, let him hear. I mean, this is okay, Steve. Number 22 has not disappointed me. Not at all. Folks, this last hour is the most important thing you could possibly hear in crypto.
Yep.
Because actually it's in the context of money and wealth that you listened. But really what it is the transformation of the man, which is you.
Yeah.
And I think that what's so great about this is not some religious practice where we're like, you got to get saved. No, you have to have interest. And I think about this, I was listening to Brandon talk to RG3 last night, and they're like, we read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Well, what is this concept of understanding something anew? And folks, I would say this, like, Steve, one, thank you for your faithfulness to put together this slide long ago, but also to take the time to explain it. Because folks, Steve has said it many times, and it is 100% true. The truth can be probed and probed and probed and probed. All it takes is our interest to know that. But the thing that I think is so amazing about this is why people throughout history have been transformed. This is why people would say to me, hey, Matt, why are you able to sit still? The essence of this thing, right, is true. And, Jesus described himself as, I am the way. That would be directional. I am the truth, and I am the life. And you think about this, well, that they would have life and have it to its fullest, this fullness of life. And we know that there's this cup that is overflowing. Well, I go back to the story of your son bringing that money to you. And I think about what we're doing in crypto. And I think about Richard Hart saying, hey, our made up internet money is better than the government's made up internet money. Why is that, folks? Because this is the base layer. The base layer is you. Yeah. You are the wealth. You are the value, because nothing is aside from your creative ability. It was given to you by the creator of the universe. And it's like when that dawns on you and you recognize that, I almost feel like the learning about Jesus and this model of what he is, basically it's the framework of creation. One, it becomes technicolor, but becomes this this beautiful, glorious obsession. If there is ever anything you could be addicted to, it would be literally to the words of the spoken living Jesus himself. Because out of that comes not only the resource, but all of the other stuff, which is the peace, all of these things. And I think about transforming the man. What does it look like when the man is transformed in his home?
Yeah.
Does it mean he's got Lambo and watches? No, he has loving relationships with his wife and kids. And I think about, in God's economy, it's not about mammon. It's not about money. What is true wealth? We would define it differently. Being rich and wealthy are two different things.
Yeah.
But to think that it's so counterintuitive to what the lie is, because the lie's been telling you got to get yours and you got to step on somebody's neck and you got to extract, you got to participate in this, and you need to be seen, and the scorecard's got to be in your favor. You got to build up bigger barns. And it's like, it's almost like this letting go function to say, wow, this is the truth. This is the way. This is the life. And it's the very framework. And that's why it can be probed, because it's true. And if you've got interest, I mean, he's always there. And that's Steve, I can't even express how thankful I am that you would take the time to do this. This is the truth. This is the truth, folks.
My pleasure.
22, man. So awesome. Steve, thanks so much for your time again today.
You bet. My pleasure. Hope everybody has a great weekend.
Thanks. Wow. How about them apples? Okay, that, every time we do this, I'm like, that was my favorite. No, this is it. And it's really cool because It's only taken 22 episodes for us to like land this plane around money, right? What this is a crypto channel, right? Isn't it amazing that Jesus has something to say about everything? But you think about resourcing. We know that, operating in this world, well, from the beginning of creation, there's this abundance, right? And we know it. But it's the interesting thing is I've been listening to the lie, right? And I've been judging the way the world judges. What does he say? John 14:26. My peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. That's what he's talking about, that left-hand side of the slide. The world gives to you in this way that is perverse. My peace I give to you, not as the world gives. Wow. It's what we long for deeply in our hearts. And it's available. And when you experience it, is like overwhelming joy. It's like weeping and being so happy and weeping. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Thanks for joining us again on the Pulse today. My name's Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. And we've done another 2 hours and 15 minutes with Steve Staggs, and I'm so thankful for that. Folks, imagine the implications of this in this next bull run. What if you were ruling your area that he's given you, your influence? You were ruling that in God's nature and character, right? And you were listening to him. Imagine what he has planned for you. I'm imagining what he has planned for me. Whew. Take care, everybody. Catch you next time.